A man named Carl Briggs had been protecting Keanu Reeves for 4 years when he decided, on a Tuesday morning in February, that the man he had been protecting for 4 years was wrong. Not about anything dangerous. Not about anything that touched the work Carl had been hired to do, which was to keep a person safe in the particular circumstances of a life that required keeping. About something smaller. About a guitar. Keanu had said the guitar in the corner of the music room at the house in the hills above Los Feliz was a 1959 Martin D-28 that had belonged to a session musician named Eddie Fuentes, who had played on 43 recorded tracks between 1961 and 1978. None of them famous. All of them the kind of work that holds a song together without ever being the thing the listener is aware of holding on to. He had said he had bought it from Eddie Fuentes' daughter 18 months ago for a price that was fair to her and less than its market value. He had said it was the best acoustic guitar he had ever played, and that he played it for an hour every morning before anything else happened. Carl had been in the house for 4 years. He had not known there was a guitar. He had also not believed there was a 1959 Martin D-28 in a corner of a room he had been in, conservatively, 220 times. He said, "I've been in that room. There's no guitar in that corner." Keanu said, "There's a guitar in that corner." Carl said, "There isn't." He said it the way a man says something when he is very sure, in the way that 4 years of proximity produces certainty, the certainty of a person who has been in a room 220 times and believes he knows the room. Keanu looked at him. He said, "Come with me." What Carl Briggs saw when he walked into the music room is the thing he cannot entirely explain to this day, because it requires explaining not just the guitar, but the 4 years of not seeing it. And that explanation has no satisfying conclusion except the one he arrived at slowly, over the weeks that followed. He had been in the room 220 times. He had looked at the corner 220 times. He had not seen the guitar. Not because it wasn't there. Because he had stopped looking. There is a house in the hills above Los Feliz, in Los Angeles, California, that sits at the end of a private road behind a gate that is not the kind of gate that announces itself. The house is low and long, built into the slope of the hill, with a view from the main terrace that takes in the city in a way that makes the city look like it is arranged for the purpose of being looked at from this particular vantage. The rooms are not decorated in the way that houses of this value are often decorated, not with the specific signals of wealth choosing to be comfortable. They are decorated in the way a person decorates a space they actually live in, with the accumulated evidence of a life. Things that have been kept because they matter and not because they match. Books whose spines are broken. Surfaces that have been used. The music room is at the east end of the house. It holds a piano, an upright Steinway that has been tuned 7 times in 4 years, and that shows the tuning marks of a person who plays it with enough seriousness to care whether it is accurate. A small recording setup along the south wall that Carl had understood, from his first week in the house, as something private and not for comment. A rack of 3 electric guitars that Carl knew about, because they were on the rack, and the rack was at eye level, and he had passed it 220 times. A chair. A lamp. A window facing east that in the morning held the particular quality of February light in Los Angeles, which is the best light the city produces, low and clear, and carrying the specific promise of a day that is not yet committed to anything. And in the corner, next to the east window, under a canvas cover that was the color of old canvas, and that rested against the wall in the particular way of something that has been in the same place long enough to have settled into that place. A guitar case, vertical, still, present in the room the way furniture is present, without announcement, without requiring attention, simply there. Carl Briggs looked at the corner. He looked at the case. He looked at Keanu. He said, "I didn't see it." Keanu said, "I know." He said, "I've been in this room." Keanu said, "I know." Carl stood in the doorway of the music room and experienced something that people who are very good at paying attention experience, rarely and badly. The specific vertigo of discovering that their attention had failed somewhere they believed it had not. He had been in the room 220 times. The case was where cases go when they are not in use, in the corner, under a cover, against the wall. It was not hidden. It was simply in the place where the eye goes when it is looking for something else, which meant that when Carl walked into the music room 220 times, looking for what he was trained to look for, threat vectors, access points, the changed thing in a room where nothing should have changed. The guitar case was invisible to him because it was not the changed thing. It was the permanent thing. It had been there since before his 4 years began, and the eye, over 4 years, had absorbed it into the background. He said, "How long has it been there?" Keanu said, "Before I bought the house." Carl said, "Before," he said, "it was the previous owners. I kept it when I bought the house. I kept it in that corner. I found out what it was in the first month, and I called the previous owner, and he said he had left it intentionally, that he wanted it to stay in the house. He had bought it from Eddie Fuentes' daughter, and he wanted it to stay in a room where it would be played." Carl looked at the case. He said, "I'm sorry. I told you it wasn't there." Keanu said, "You told me what you could see." He said, That's not the same as being right." Keanu said, "No, it isn't." He said it without particular weight, not to make the point heavier, just to agree with it, because it was true. Carl stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then he said, "Can I see it?" Carl Briggs had come to personal protection work after 8 years in the United States Secret Service, where he had worked the presidential detail for 6 of those years and the Foreign Dignitary Protection Program for 2. He had left the service at 37 for reasons that were partly financial. The private sector paid more than the federal government in ways that became more significant when you had 2 children in school, and partly personal, in the way that 8 years of a particular kind of vigilance produces a need, in some people, for a different relationship with the work. He had joined the private security firm that had contracted with Keanu's team in the 7th year of the firm's operation, and he had been assigned to this particular principal after 2 years of assignments that had not been wrong, but had not quite been right. The kind of assignments where the professional fit was adequate and the human fit was something else. He had been told, before the assignment, that this principal had a reputation for being uncomplicated in the ways that made the work easier. No substances, no volatile social situations, no security resistance. He had been told that the previous lead had left on good terms after 3 years for a different assignment, which was the best possible exit from a principal assignment and which told him what he needed to know about the principal's character. He had found all of this to be accurate. What he had not been told, and what had taken him some months to understand, was that this particular principal had a quality that complicated the work in a way that was not on the standard list of complicating factors. He was genuinely interested in the people around him, not as a social performance, as a practice. He asked Carl questions that were not small talk, questions about the service, about the specific mechanics of the work he had done on the presidential detail, about what it was like to be in a room where the stakes of your attention were the kind of stakes they were. He asked them the way people ask things when they want the answer and not the conversation, and Carl had found, over 4 years, that the questions had produced something he had not expected from a principal relationship. He had actually talked about the work with the person he was protecting. in ways that he had not talked about it with most people in his life. This had made him better at the job in some ways, more present, more honest about what he was doing and why. It had also produced, over 4 years, the specific risk of proximity. He had begun to feel that he knew the man, and knowing someone, or feeling that you know them, produces a particular kind of certainty that is the enemy of the attention the work requires. He had told Keanu the guitar wasn't there. He had been certain. He had been looking at a corner for 4 years and had not seen what was in it. The woman who had been with the household for longer than Carl was a person named Marguerite Vasquez. She was 51 years old, had been the house manager for 7 years, and had been there when the previous owner's guitar case came in through the east door and was put in the corner of the music room and had remained in the corner of the music room through the sale and through the new owner's arrival and through 4 years of Carl Briggs walking past it 220 times. She had not told Carl about the guitar. This requires explanation, because Marguerite was not a person who withheld information carelessly or with any intention of creating problems. She was, in fact, exactly the opposite. A person whose care for the house and the people in it was expressed primarily through the anticipation of needs and the quiet meeting of them. The kind of competence that is invisible, because it prevents the things that would otherwise make it visible. She had been managing this household and its predecessor for 7 years, with the attention of someone who believes that the house is the expression of the life it holds, and that the life is better when the expression is well tended. She had not told Carl about the guitar because, in 7 years, Carl's arrival was the first time a security principal had been in the house who had not either asked about the guitar or noticed it on their own. The previous security contractor, a man named Vincent, who had been there for 2 years before Carl's firm was brought in, had asked about the guitar in his first week and had been told its story by the previous owner's estate manager and had retained the information as a standing feature of the music room's inventory. Carl had not asked. He had also, in 4 years, never mentioned the corner of the music room to Marguerite in any context. She had assumed, from the absence of the question, that he knew. She found out otherwise on the Tuesday morning in February when she heard Carl say, in the corridor outside the music room, that there was no guitar in the corner. She had been carrying a tray of coffee from the kitchen. She stopped. She heard Keanu say, "Come with me." She stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she continued to the terrace with the coffee and set it down and went back to the kitchen and thought about the 4 years of not asking and not being asked, and about the particular way that information moves through a house when the people in it are each looking at what they are trained to look at and none of them are quite looking at the same thing. She had known about the guitar. He had not known she knew. She had not known he didn't know. And Carl had not known there was anything to know. This was not a failure of communication. It was the specific consequence of 3 people in the same house for 4 years, each of them competent and attentive within their own domain, none of them having had the conversation that would have connected the domains. The guitar had lived in the gap between them. In plain sight. Under a canvas cover that was the color of old canvas. Marguerite came to the music room at 9:15. Carl was in the room. Keanu was in the chair by the window, the Martin D28 across his lap, not playing it, just holding it the way you hold something you know well, with the ease of long familiarity. Carl was standing near the door in the posture of someone who has received information that requires processing and has not finished processing it. She said to Carl, "You didn't know about the guitar." He looked at her. He said, "You knew." She said, "I've known for 7 years." He said, "Why didn't you?" She said, "Because I assumed you knew. You never asked." Carl was quiet for a moment. She said, "Vincent knew." The previous contractor. Carl said, Vincent never gave me a full transfer brief. Marguerite said, no. He gave you the security brief. Carl said, the guitar wasn't in the security brief. She said, the guitar is not a security matter. He said, I know that. She said, it's a 1959 Martin D-28 that was left in this room 7 years ago by a man who wanted it played. It has been in that corner since before either of us was here. Carl looked at the corner. He looked at the case, which was open now. The guitar, out of it. He looked at Keanu. Keanu was looking out the east window at the February light. Carl said, how many things are there in this house that I don't know about because nobody put them in the security brief? Marguerite said, nothing that affects the security brief. He said, that wasn't the question. She looked at him. She said, a few. He said, I'd like to know them. She said, all right. He said, not for security. He stopped. She waited. He said, because I've been here 4 years, and I told a man I know well that something wasn't in his house, and it was in his house, and I was wrong in a way that I can't fully account for, and I'd rather not be wrong in that way again. Marguerite looked at him for a moment. She said, that's a reasonable thing to want. She said, come find me this afternoon. We'll walk the house. She left the tray of coffee on the table near the piano. She left the room. Carl remained in the doorway. In the chair by the window, Keanu put his fingers on the strings. He did not play a song. He played a chord. One chord. The kind of chord that is also a question, that resolves into the room and then dissolves. And then he was quiet, and the February light came through the east window and fell across the floor of the music room, the way light falls in a room where nothing is in the wrong place. Carl watched this for a moment. Then he went to do his job. Marguerite walked the house with Carl that afternoon. It took 2 hours and 11 minutes. Not because the house was large, though it was, but because Marguerite walked the way she did everything, with full attention to what she was showing, pausing at each room to say what there was to say about it, giving Carl the time to absorb and ask. She had been walking this house for 7 years, and she knew it in the way that a person knows something they have been tending long enough, that the tending has become the knowing. Carl asked questions, not security questions. The other kind. The questions about how the house worked, what it held, what the objects in it were, and where they had come from, and what they meant. Marguerite answered each one. She told him about the piano and the 7 tunings. She told him about the recording setup on the south wall of the music room, which had been built from second-hand equipment over 3 years, and which was used primarily for demos that were never sent anywhere, and that were, as far as she knew, the most private thing in the house. She told him about the kitchen arrangement and the specific reason certain things were kept where they were kept. She told him about the terrace and the morning routine. At the end of the walk, they were back in the music room. The guitar was back in its case. The case was back in the corner. Carl looked at the corner. He said, I'm going to see it every time now. Marguerite said, yes. He said, that's a strange feeling. She said, which part? He said, knowing it was there the whole time. She was quiet for a moment. She said, the house doesn't change. What changes is what you're looking for when you walk through it. He said, what was I looking for before? She said, threats. He said, and that made the guitar invisible. She said, the guitar isn't a threat. He said, no, but it's part of the house. It's part of his life. And I didn't know it was there. Marguerite looked at the corner. She said, do you know what that guitar means to him? He said, he plays it an hour every morning. He told me he bought it. He told me the previous owner left it. She said, did he tell you why he plays it an hour every morning? Carl said, no. She said, "Ask him." He said, "Is it my place to ask?" She said, "You've been asking him about the service for 4 years." He looked at her. She said, "He asks about your work because it interests him. You might try returning the practice." She left him in the music room. He stood there for a moment, looking at the corner. Then he went to find him. The conversation happened on the terrace, with the city laid out below them in the particular way of a February afternoon in Los Angeles, the light going gold at the edges in the hour before it gave out entirely. Carl had brought his own coffee. He had sat down across from Keanu, not the professional distance of a person doing a job, but across from. "The way you sit with someone when you want to talk," he said. "Marguerite told me to ask you about the guitar." Keanu looked at him. He said, "She did." Carl said, "Why do you play it an hour every morning?" Keanu was quiet for a moment. He said, "Because it reminds me what the work is for." Carl said, "Playing guitar?" He said, "No, the hour. The thing that happens in the hour before everything else. I've had a version of that hour since I was 23. The thing in it changes. For a while it was something else. And then it was the guitar, and before that it was something before that. But the hour is the same. The hour is the part of the day that belongs entirely to the thing itself, and not to anything the thing is going to become." Carl looked at the city. He said, "The guitar specifically," Keanu said. "Eddie Fuentes played on 43 tracks between 1961 and 1978. You've never heard any of them, and neither have I, probably. His daughter told me that he played this guitar on all of them. Not on stage. In studios, in the room where nobody sees you, doing the work that holds the thing together. She said he called it the honest guitar because it didn't respond to performance. It responded to playing." Carl said, "What does that mean?" He said, "It means you can't impress it. You can only play it. And if you play it honestly, it sounds like that. And if you play it for effect, it sounds like something less." Carl was quiet for a moment. He said, "I've been here 4 years." Keanu said yes. Carl said, "I didn't know that guitar existed." He said, "I know." Carl said, "I'm not sure what else I don't know." Keanu looked at him. The kind of looking that people do when they are going to say something honest and are deciding how honest to make it. He said, "You know the job. You're very good at the job. What you don't know, what you're starting to find out, is the house. Those are different things. The job is about what changes. The house is about what stays." Carl said, "The guitar stays." He said, "The guitar stays." Carl looked at the city for a moment. He said, "What else stays?" Keanu said, "Marguerite knows. She walked you through it today. She's been here 7 years. She knows the house the way I know the guitar. Not because she's been studying it, because she's been tending it." Carl said, "She said to come find her." He said, "She's right." Carl said, "I told you the guitar wasn't there." Keanu said, "Yes." He said, "I was very certain." Keanu said, "I know." Carl said, "That concerns me." He said, "It should, but not for the reason you're thinking." Carl looked at him. He said, "You're not a worse security professional because you didn't know about the guitar. You're a professional who has been looking at the room for what the room might become rather than what it is. That's the right training for the job. The problem is when you start to believe that what you're looking for is the whole room." He said it in the way he said things, plainly, without ornament, in the register of someone who has been thinking about something for a while and has arrived at the plain version. Carl said, "How long have you known that I was doing that?" He said, "About a year." Carl said, "Why didn't you say something?" He said, "Because I didn't know how to say it yet. And because the work was good, and because He stopped. He said, "Because I was waiting for the guitar." Carl looked at him. He said, "You knew it would come up." He said, "I knew something would come up." That's different from knowing what. Carl sat with this for a moment. He said, "What do you want me to do differently?" He said, "What you're already doing. Walk the house. Talk to Marguerite. Ask the questions you weren't asking, not because the guitar is a threat. Because a person's life is larger than its threat surface, and if you only know the threat surface, you only know part of the person you're protecting." He said, "And you need to know the rest?" He said, "I don't need it. But I think you do." Carl looked at the city. The light had gone gold all the way through now. Below them, Los Angeles was doing what Los Angeles does at the end of a February afternoon, settling into itself, the day releasing its particular hold, the city finding the register it runs at after dark. He said, "The guitar sounds like what you described. The honest guitar." Keanu said, "Yes." He said, "Can I hear it sometime?" He said, "Come by at 7 any morning." Carl said, "During the hour?" He said, "The hour is the right time." Carl Briggs walked the house with Marguerite 3 more times over the following 6 weeks. Not because the first walk had been insufficient, it had been thorough, but because walking a house once is not the same as knowing it, and Carl was building knowledge rather than inventory. Marguerite understood the distinction and walked accordingly, slower on the second walk than the first, stopping at the things that seemed to generate questions, letting him arrive at the right questions rather than preempting them. On the third walk, she told him about the recording setup in the music room. Not what it was. She had told him that on the first walk, but what it meant. She told him that in 4 years, she had never once been asked to listen to anything that came from that room, and that she had never asked, and that this was the right arrangement. She told him that there was a quality in the way someone worked when they knew the work was only for them, and that the recording setup existed to serve that quality, and that the house understood this, and that the understanding was part of what made the house the right house for the life it held. Carl wrote nothing down on these walks. He had the training for retention that the service provides, which is a specific and genuine skill, and he used it. But he also noticed that writing nothing down changed the way he was absorbing the information, not as inventory, as Marguerite had said, but as understanding. The guitar in the corner, the piano and its 7 tunings, the east window and the February light, the hour before everything else. He came to the music room at 7 on a Thursday morning 3 weeks after the Tuesday in February. He came quietly, the way he did everything, without announcement, having told Marguerite the previous evening that he might, and having received from her a look that was not quite a smile, but contained something in that neighborhood. He stood in the doorway. The February light, it was still February, came through the east window the way it always did at 7 in the morning in February, low and clear, falling across the floor and across the chair where Keanu sat with the Martin D28 across his lap. He was not playing for effect. Carl stood in the doorway and listened. He did not interrupt. He did not announce himself. He stood and listened to the honest guitar being played honestly in the February light. And he understood, in the way that you understand something when you hear it rather than when you are told it, what the hour was for, what the work was for before the work became the thing the work was going to become. After a while, Keanu looked up. He looked at Carl in the doorway. He did not say anything. Carl did not say anything. After a moment, Carl went to do his job. The guitar went back in its case at 8 o'clock, as it did every morning. The case went back in the corner. The day began. Marguerite Vasquez was still with the house 2 years after the Tuesday in February. She had been there for 9 years by then, and the house had the quality that well-tended things acquire over time. Not the quality of newness, but the deeper quality of something that knows what it is, and has been maintained in that knowledge by someone who cared enough to maintain it. Carl Briggs was still on the assignment. He had requested, at his annual review with the firm, a conversation with the firm's training director about a specific adjustment to the new assignment orientation protocol, specifically the transition brief between outgoing and incoming principals. He had described the gap he had identified, the difference between the security brief, which covered the threat surface of a principal's life, and the household brief, which covered the life itself. He had said that in his experience the two were connected in ways that the current protocol did not account for, and that the connection mattered for the quality of the protection. The training director had listened. He had asked Carl to write up the proposal. Carl had written 4 pages. He had sent them. The revised orientation protocol had been in use for 14 months when Carl's firm was contracted for a new high-profile principal assignment, and the incoming lead, a woman named Terry, had received both the security brief and what the firm now called the household brief, a structured intake document that covered not the threat surface but the life, the objects that mattered, the routines that held the day together, the people in the household who had been there longest and what they knew. Terry had called Carl after her first week on the new assignment. She had said the household brief made the first week different. He had asked how. She had said, "I asked about the objects." First day. The client seemed surprised. He had said, "What did they say?" She had said, "They said nobody had ever asked before." Carl had said, "I know." He said, "Keep asking." The Martin D-28 was still in the corner of the music room at the east end of the house in the hills above Los Feliz. It was played every morning at 7 for an hour before the day began. The canvas cover was the same cover it had always been, the color of old canvas, against the wall in the corner by the east window. Nothing in the music room changed. That was the point. I have been thinking about what Carl saw when he walked into the music room and found the guitar. Not the guitar itself. The fact that he had been in that room 220 times. That the guitar had been in the corner 220 times. That he had looked at the corner 220 times and had not seen it. He was good at his job. He had trained for 8 years with one of the most demanding protective detail organizations in the world. His attention was his professional instrument, honed and maintained and trusted. And he had looked at a corner 220 times and not seen a guitar case that was not hidden, not moved, not concealed in any way. Because he was looking for something else, because the corner was not the place where the thing he was trained to look for would appear. Because after enough time, the permanent things become the background, and the background becomes invisible, and the invisible things are everywhere. I think about the guitar cases in my own life, the things that have been in the corners of the rooms I walk through every day, in plain sight, undercovers the color of old canvas. The permanent things that my attention has absorbed into the background because I have decided I am looking for something else. I do not know how many there are. I know there are more than 220 visits worth. The question that Carl arrived at, what else is there in this house that I don't know about, is the one I keep turning over, not as an accusation, as a genuine question, asked in the spirit of someone who has just understood that proximity is not the same as knowledge, and that the most important things are sometimes the things you stopped seeing first. The honest guitar does not respond to performance. It responds to playing. I think about that a lot. This story is fictional, inspired by Keanu Reeves' well-known practice of genuine attentiveness. The way the people who have known him longest describe a man who has never stopped being curious about what is actually in the rooms he inhabits. Drop a comment and tell me what stayed with you, the moment that kept coming back. Share this with someone who might need it today. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one. See you in the next one.